I think we need to stop looking at this as a gap and call it theft. Call it what it is. Like, it's theft in a way. When people look at it that way, they might be a bit more aggravated and a bit more motivated to actually solve for it.
Welcome to the Rich and Regular podcast, where we explore life at the intersection of money. I'm Kirsten.
And I'm Julian. And today we're breaking down two biggest reasons women still lag behind in wealth. It's Women's History Month. And so we're going to talk a little bit about women. I'm going to try my best to listen. I'm just putting that out there from the start because I do not want to be attacked on social media. But before we get started, I want to give a shout out to Papa Adams. Papa Adams. I'm assuming this is a nickname, but you never know these days. His first name could be Papa.
Yeah, that's a great name.
That's a great name. Papa Adams sent us an email not too long ago. It's a little too long for me to read, but I want to focus on the middle part here. He says, I'm married. My wife and I just had our first child together a couple years ago, so we're getting a late start on retirement and investing, all while having a young child and paying for daycare in a high cost of living area. Bro,
I remember.
I know that feeling, and I encourage you now to go ahead and set a celebration date from the moment you get to leave daycare, and you can take that $1,500 or however much money you're spending a month. It was $1,500 when we were in it, or it was knocking on $1,500. I think that was the national average. It wouldn't surprise me if that number is higher. He then goes on to say, over the last 2 years, we've learned to automate our savings and investing. We've learned to avoid lifestyle creep when getting raises or more money. We've set up an emergency fund, and 2 weeks ago opened a Roth with Fidelity. We are also working to pay down student loans and high interest debt. There is still a long way to go, but the building blocks are being laid. And ultimately, today is the youngest I'll ever be. And all I can do is my best going forward. I love getting notes from this. Also, particularly enjoy getting notes from men like this, because we don't really get those. I'm just going to be honest, right? Like, we have a pretty good understanding of our audience. It's mostly women, but every now and then we get some notes from
It's a lot of men.
I know there's a lot. They send DMs. They don't send emails. They comment on things, but fellas typically don't send emails through. So I really appreciate that. And congratulations. It is just that simple. Yeah. Honestly, if you keep that going 10 years from now, 15, 20 years from now, you will look back and feel like, my goodness, like, I'm so glad I started when I did. So shout out to Papa Adams, wherever you are in the world. You never know. And keep it moving.
Yes. All right. So Women's History Month. Yes. And the reasons why women are still lagging in wealth. And this is particularly frustrating for me, not just because it's March Madness and I'm extremely competitive and my team probably ain't going to the big dance this year.
Probably. Like, I'm not a betting man. But
it's heartbreaking enough. But it's frustrating because women are literally better investors than men. Like, this is not me and my opinion. This has been proven that we're literally better at it. Investing is a woman's game.
Yep.
And so it's just frustrating that we can't catch up. The gap is just so stubborn. And this is not just true of women. All of the gaps are stubborn, whether we're talking about the racial wealth gap or the wage gap, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's just stubborn. But the good news is that according to Fidelity, 71% of women now own stocks, which is a huge leap. And according to NASDAQ, as of 2024, approximately 60% of women are investing in the stock market, which is a significant increase from previous years.
Yeah.
So when you think about that in the context of women's history, not too long ago, women couldn't even open a bank account without a man's signature. It's worth celebrating. But despite all that progress, the gender wealth gap is still really massive.
Yeah.
And to me, that's why investing alone isn't enough. We really have to play the full game. Earning, investing, building wealth, making sure that we're protecting our assets, all of the things.
Yeah. It's not frustrating for me, obviously, because I'm not a woman. It's frustrating from a standpoint of overall generational and cultural progress. Like, that's the part that's frustrating for me, because it seems like something that we could very easily fix. It seems like something that, like, just really requires us to think differently and act differently. But that part is still stubborn. Like, culturally and socially, we are holding this back. We are creating it. It's created. It didn't just happen. And that's the part that is interesting, actually, for me. But, I would imagine if I were a woman, it would be especially frustrating. So I totally understand that.
I feel like more men should be frustrated because all it does is put the burden on you. If you are married or if you have daughters or if you have any women in your life that you care about, the fact that they cannot afford to keep up with the cost of their living, the fact that they don't have their own wealth to offset what your wealth needs to do
Yep.
should be frustrating. Like that just seems like a game that you're not going to win, especially as much as people believe in being providers and leading the household. It's like if women don't win, it's not going to work. Like,
Well, yeah, and I guess I am frustrated. I think I just hesitate to use that word because I don't want to presume that I feel the same level of frustration that
oh,
a
I
woman
see.
feels. You know what I mean? So I'm like trying to reserve that word because even that I would say is a pretty gentle approach. It's infuriating to me because for me, I just want us to culturally and socially make progress. And I'm not even just talking about the communities that I'm a part of. I mean, the United States of America.
No.
Like these are things that I feel like we can solve. To your point, women are better investors. That's not just an opinion. We do have data and statistics to prove that, but the gap still exists and has persisted over time. There are a couple of reasons for that. I want to jump right into it. The first one is the pay gap. And this just makes sense, right? And we've spoken about this from several different angles, but most people invest with money that they earn from their job. Most people are not entrepreneurs. Most people are employees. And in the employment space, the labor force, there is a clear, measurable difference that has persisted between how much women are paid for the same work relative to other groups. In most cases, we're looking at white men as being the highest paid group. Depending on how you slice it, people will say that's not necessarily true, but in most cases, this is what we're comparing it to. And so when you look at that particular group for the same work, according to what was it, NASDAQ? There are tons of different ways to look at it, but basically, as of 2023, women earned as a whole 84 cents on the dollar for every dollar that their white, non-Hispanic working peers earned. And then when you slice that 84, break that down into different racial groups, you can see that there's even greater disparities there. So white women, though they are underpaid relative to their white male peers, are still earning less. They're earning around 79.6 cents per dollar. Next in line is black women, and there's a pretty big jump here. They're earning approximately 66.5 cents. Let's go ahead and round up and call it 67 cents to the dollar. And then Latino women are even less than that, 57.8 cents to the dollar. Obviously, when you start to look at those numbers on an annual basis for white women, we're looking at around $15,500 per year. For black women, for the same work, we're looking at around $25,000 a year, and Latino women almost $32,000 a year. That's insane.
Yeah.
But we've accepted that as normal. And then I've had some lingering thoughts on this for a really, really long time. I kind of want to get into it, but I kind of don't. But to me, I think we need to stop looking at this as a gap and call it theft.
Mm.
Call it what it is. Like it's theft in a way,
Hmm.
And I think when people look at it that way, they might be a bit more aggravated and a bit more motivated to actually solve for it. If you tell someone that they stole 30 cents from you
Right.
or $30 from you or $30,000 from you last year, you are much more motivated to stop the presses. But when we focus on the cents, compared to another dollar, it's like, yeah, 30 cents here, 20 cents there. But like in no world, I would imagine that if you told any of these women who are really on the any end or anywhere on the spectrum of this gap, um, that somebody stole 20,000, 15,000, $30,000 from them, they would want to know who
Yeah.
and why and when and
Yeah.
how do I get my money back with interest and penalties, right? But
I also think we need to stop talking in averages. Like we keep quoting this 84 cents to the dollar thing, but when you understand how averages work, you understand that that's largely propped up by Asian women who are earning 94 cents
correct.
to the dollar versus white non-Hispanic men. And that's no shade to Asian women. That's just how averages work.
Yep.
And so when you look at it and you see, well, within that, Latina women are earning 57 cents and black women 67 cents and white women 79 cents. It's like saying that it's 84 cents is actually a little disingenuous. It just kind of it makes the argument more positive when that's not experienced across the board for everyone. Because you're right, it's easy to dismiss the difference between 84 cents and a dollar.
Yeah.
Not nearly as easy to dismiss $32,000 for everybody else.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of ways that you can look at this, and it has been analyzed and written about and criticized in many different ways. But overall, I'm kind of looking at it from a macro perspective, and that is to say, like we've always said, we can't talk about money without talking about work. And so a lot of
That's
this
it.
is tied to what we've accepted as normal, to what we've accepted as just the times that we're in, and that is part of the frustration. That's probably the 10th time we've used that word. So bias in the workplace is a strong contributor to why this gap exists. But there are some other reasons, the notion, or the reality, I should say, that women do take breaks. Again, this is something that we've just accepted as normal. It doesn't have to be that way, but we've accepted the fact that, well, because these people get pregnant and they have to take career breaks, well, they should not be paid the same amount of money. We've just accepted that as normal.
That's
There are plenty of
crazy.
things that don't really make sense or that we feel uncomfortable with, but we've not accepted it as normal. These are one of the things that we've just said, well, yeah, they're not entitled to be paid more because they take career breaks, despite humanity being reliant on pregnancy. But
And women.
yeah, yeah, but we've just accepted that as normal. And then going back to sort of the bias, or the role that bias plays in this, it's that women are not promoted nearly as much as men, right? So when you look at leadership positions, when you look at boards, and I'm not just talking about CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, we're also looking at just like upper level management positions like that. When you reach certain levels, oftentimes you are entitled to certain benefits, whether it's stock bonuses or, sort of deferred compensation packages. All of those things factor into the downstream effect as to why more women than men do not have nearly as much invested assets. They don't have enough money to play with. They don't have enough money to invest. And as a result, all of these things are kind of connected. So yeah, work, surprise, surprise, plays a really important factor above and beyond just like what we've accepted socially and culturally in the United States.
And I think that's really important because even when you talk about something like a 401k match, which is standard traditional financial advice, a 401k match on a salary that is $32,000 less than
Yep.
someone else's does not hit the same. That's
Yep.
just basic math.
Yep.
So, long story short, we're playing with a smaller budget. So, we need a smarter strategy
Yep.
because we have less money coming in, which means you got less money coming out. That's the first reason the gap is so persistent. The second reason, and the one that I want to spend the most time on in this episode, is more mental because it deals with confidence, hesitancy, and playing too safe. Because women do invest better. Again, that is data, not my opinion, but we also hesitate more. There's a confidence gap that leads to us choosing lower risk investments or worse, just not investing at all. We've been socially conditioned, whether it's through religion, gender dynamics, or just what we've seen, to save instead of to build wealth, right? We've seen our mothers coupon clipping. We're always thinking about other people before we think about ourselves and our future. And so we save money, but we don't necessarily invest it and put it in a place where it can grow. And so the sports translation is basically we play too much defense and then we never shoot our shot, right? So like we're not adding any points to the board and it's all mental.
Yeah. This is why I say it's interesting to me or intriguing to me, because these were kind of the tidbits in some of the conversations that I know I was having 15, 20 years ago. You were sitting back with your friends and having these deep conversations. And this is when I started to connect the dots and recognize the importance of what money played in our lives. And again, this is one of the things that just really, really intrigued me. I remember thinking about like dating, and obviously, we know that money and earning potential plays a role in how people identify their mates. But I just looked at it as like a matter of like biological interest, right? Because we're human beings and this is what we do. This is our version of what a bird of paradise might do in terms of how they decorate their home. And it's like, oh, wow, this is just our version of it. Like our cars and houses and, us making ourselves look nice is our kind of version of nature expressing itself.
Yeah.
Birds do other things, animals are sniffing each other's butts and, dancing and giving off certain pheromones and all that stuff. Our version of it is really using money as a way to send signals to a like-minded mate, prospective mate. It's interesting. But what I found fascinating about it, going back to the role that women play and the focus of this conversation, was specific to the Black community, which was the data that showed that in Black communities specifically, in recent years, you saw a flip where Black women were becoming the breadwinners. So in Black households, more Black women are either co-breadwinners or lead breadwinners in the family, which to me, again, looking at it as a nature buff, I was like, oh my gosh, well, that is a weird sort of turning this thing on its head, because now the men aren't the ones dancing anymore. It's the women. And are they dancing? Are the men doing the dancing now, trying to attract the mate? But it's interesting. And what I found fascinating was that even though, to your point about playing it safe, even though women were becoming more of the breadwinners, they were still deferring to the male. Why? Because our customs and our culture and society sort of recommends and requires in many cases that this is what is natural. This is what you should do. And despite there being evidence or you knowing that better is possible, or knowing that you were likely better equipped to make certain types of decisions, it was interesting to me that there were a lot of women who were willing to defer and still let their men make those kinds of decisions, despite the data, despite the evidence, despite what they know to be true. So I'm not criticizing anyone. I'm just saying, looking at it almost as like a behavioral economist in a way, it was really interesting to me to kind of look at this dynamic playing out in real time, because I have a lot of professional female friends, and it was really interesting, like how they were struggling with that dynamic, because they were willing to have certain conversations with me, because they were like, well, wait a second, because I know what you're talking about, because I've read the same thing. Their husbands aren't reading those things, and so like, maybe could you talk to him? I was like, no, that's your husband. Like, you're not trying. I'm not trying to get stabbed over this your friend. He gonna think something going on with me. Like, culturally, that's not something that that we agree to be doing. And I'm not making light of the decision, but again, like, these are really, really big obstacles that I think we have to be willing to discuss, and as a result, strategize differently so that we can kind of progress, as a family, as a community, as a culture. So
I think that's important to mention because it's changing, especially if you look at that research across age groups, which is why it's so important to slice the data. Y'all cannot keep taking
averages and
we cannot keep taking averages as the story. We're going to talk about it a little later in the episode, but when you look at boomer women over the age
mm-hmm,
of 60 who were hands off in their younger years, they're now
mm-hmm,
starting to be hands on because they recognize that they're likely going to live longer than their husband, and they need to get an understanding of investments in order to not have family conflicts.
mm-hmm.
And so that is a new shift that's happening. That's what I saw in my Invest for Better circle, where there was a range of women with a range of experiences, and the stories and the encouragement that we're starting to give other women is so different from what I heard in my 20s.
Yeah.
It's no longer just like, you handle the day-to-day purchases, he handles the long-term stuff. It's more like, you might want to get your hands and understand what investments look like, what your long-term plan is, so that you're not surprised later on when you have to deal with this stuff.
Yeah, there's one part of the culture, if you will, that I think is one that could really be helpful. It's like connecting with that rich auntie, and probably doing
Yes.
that on a more regular basis, talking to those women
Your
who
grandma.
have gone through those divorces, and really listening to some of the mistakes that they made. And a lot of them you find, at least it's been a bit of a theme. I'm not going to go ahead and make a grandiose statement, but in some of the conversations that I've been having with people, there are a lot of women who are regretting being so, for lack of a better word, what's the word I'm going to say?
Hands off.
I was going to say submissive.
Oh, see, now you're trying to invite
I
a
just,
different corner of the internet.
I'm
We
just,
talking about
all I'm
money.
saying, I'm trying to protect the anonymity of the friends that I've had, but there are a lot of women that I know, whether it's triggered by death or divorce, that are realizing that they probably should have been a bit more hands-on over the
Yeah.
last 15 to 20 years, because
Yeah.
they're realizing that they've been listening to someone and that person did not know what they were talking about.
Yeah.
So all of that to say, in terms of solutions, not that we're going to solve this, but I do think, to your point, one of the things that I would say, and some of the things that I recommend to a lot of my friends who are women, is exactly what you said, just is playing to win. And we talk about this with our son too. I'm a little triggered here because I'm putting on my coach hat. There is a difference between playing to win and playing not to lose.
Yes.
And to me, it's actually one of the most fascinating things to watch. Like, a team is ahead. They did not expect to be this ahead. There's 2 minutes left, and they are like, man, let's just not mess this up, because I think we're about to win this thing. Oh
Yeah.
my
Let's
goodness.
not take any more
I'm not going
shots.
to touch anything. Like, let me just run away from the defender. Let me just, like, play it safe and hope that time runs out. And by the time it's done, all the confetti goes down. Meanwhile, there is somebody literally trying their hardest, fighting till the death to take your cookies. And in this case, it's not necessarily that there are scammers or people out there trying to take your cookies, but there are people who are making smarter, more aggressive decisions. And as a result, winning or ending up with significantly more. And that becomes really, really meaningful as you get older in life. Cause like you want to be someone who has a more comfortable nest egg to work with versus someone who doesn't. And I think that is something that is really, really important, is recognizing that you are playing it a little bit too safe, whether it is deferring to your husband or your partner, whether it is you deferring to your financial advisor and choosing to be hands off and not ask any questions because you don't believe that you have any inherent right to do so. It's relying on your own ability to think critically
Correct.
to influence or shape some of those decisions, as opposed to constantly putting yourself in this defensive, reactive, and submissive, for lack of a better word, or inferior, whatever word you want to choose. But you're smart. You're smart for a reason. But if you don't use that intellect, you're basically smart for no reason. You have to use it. You have to apply it. And I think we know that inherently, but in many cases, and we're specifically talking about women, they defer and they say, well, it's fine. This part they trust. It's like trust over like critical thinking. And so it's tough. But I think,
Yeah,
yeah, like trying to avoid risk is different from managing risk
exactly.
intelligently. I think
Exactly.
starting with like, the goal I think for a lot of people should be to start with your core portfolio and continue to use your brain and baseline levels of analysis to determine whether or not those decisions were good or not. And if they weren't, you can adjust accordingly. But in most cases, if you've been following the advice that we've been giving and keeping it simple and focusing on broad-based, low-cost index funds or any version of that, like the simple fundamentals of investing, if you can do that over time, you owe it to yourself now to embrace risk a little bit more. I've been asked before, what does it feel like to be rich? And it took me, it was weird, but it made me realize it's really just about risk. It's about being more comfortable with risk. Like there was a time where decisions were so risky that it would overwhelm you, but you become a different person when you know that actually you can afford to take certain risks. And that's what being rich is all about. It's like being a little bit more comfortable and being at ease despite the risks that exist, because you have safeguards in place and you know that everything you have and your entire well-being is not reliant on these things. And I think you get that after 10 years, 15 years of investing, you have enough, and you owe it to yourself, I think, to embrace that risk, because they're just learning opportunities more than anything. You're not betting the farm on it. You know that, hey, if it works out, man, that's going to be really, really cool. If it doesn't, it's okay. I'm still okay. But that requires you to be more actively engaged, and you really have to be like, plugged in and in control. You got to have at least one hand on the steering wheel.
Exactly. And that is the definition of confidence we should be using when we're talking to children or when we're talking to women or men, even men. That's the definition of confidence we should be using. It's the willingness to add risk strategically over time. That's it.
Yep.
I'm more confident. I feel confident not because I've got all of these backup plans and I've got all this extra money. I feel confident in me.
Yeah.
I feel confident that I can actually figure it out. If something goes wrong, I'll catch it soon enough because I've done the research. I can recover. I have the ability to think through this problem. If I got myself here, then I can get myself at least over here.
Yeah.
That is confidence. Women need to start using the same confidence that we use in every other area, whether it's having a child or caregiving or going to work. We need to start using it with our money. We really need to believe that if we figured this out, then we can figure that out. If that person got it, then we could probably get it too.
You know what's interesting about that? And, I feel like I always have to add a little bit of a disclaimer here, but we're making generalizations. We're making bold statements here. Women are far better equipped at managing emotions. Like they have far more exercise in dealing with emotions. And we know that emotions can be like the single greatest factor that derails people in their investing journeys. Yet they don't employ that ability, that comfort level with, just being up and down or dealing with all of these other issues, just through the nature of the role that they oftentimes play in society. I would imagine if I read through all that research that would come up at some point. But like men are far too wired and driven, and society sort of further cultivates that, like be bold and blah, blah, blah. It's like, despite the mess that you're creating. And it's like, dude, you got to be willing to turn on the news, despite their best efforts to convince you that the world is completely falling falling apart and be like, yeah, this is one of 365 days. Everything will be fine.
Yeah.
You know, and women are far better dealing with that than men are.
That's one of the reasons we're better investors. We don't panic sell,
Yeah.
nor do we panic buy. We are far more steady. There's a difference between being risk averse and being risk aware. Women are risk aware first, and then we become, through socialization, because we're told we're too emotional, because we're told that men are supposed to lead, then we become risk averse. But if you can just stop at the awareness phase and actually start to build a plan from there, it becomes a lot easier to take those little steps. And again, we're not the type to bet the farm. Like, we're not the type to say, all right, we'll throw $300,000 into Bitcoin. It might just be $10, or it might just be, I believe in this stock or this fund, and that's what I want to start with. But we have to start. Right now, we're just so busy accounting for all of the risks to the point where we're not doing anything.
Yep.
Well, we're doing something, but we're not doing enough. And there's more there. We need to actually push forward. We need to invest at a higher rate, or at least be able to add a little risk, like sprinkle in a little risk to our portfolios over time so that we can actually catch up.
Yeah. I'll give you another example, and this one is certainly supported by studies and data. But one of the things that I see as I am recollecting some of the conversations I've had over the years is that women are far more likely to delay a decision and get stuck in analysis paralysis. It's like all of this intellect and ability to manage critical thinking and to have read all these studies, they're far more willing to say, well, let me just make sure. Like, they're waiting for absolute certainty.
Yes.
At the risk of losing out on time. And that becomes one of the other issues why they aren't making enough progress, because they, to your point, like, they have the ability to think through or sort through some of these issues far better than men do. But they're always, I shouldn't say always, but like more likely to want to read one more thing and go to one more place and talk to one more person. And then before you know it, years have gone by. I literally just had this conversation with a family member, and it was like, we had this conversation about 2-3 years ago, and you're still doing it. Now, my male friends are very different. They will call and ask for counsel and advice, but they lead with bravado. Like, they're calling and saying that they don't know, but in the process of asking, they frame it up as if I already know, but I just want to make sure that you.
Or they've already done it.
Or they've already done it.
I want advice based on what I've already done.
Correct.
Versus women who are like, here's what I'm thinking. Can you give me advice?
My male friends and family members that have reached out to me are far more likely, to your point, to have already pulled the trigger, and they're calling you, hey man, I just did this thing, but then I heard this. I just want to make sure, whereas the women are far more likely to sit and wait. And before I do it, I want to stop and I want to think about it and let time go on. And then I'm having the same conversation with them in 2025 than I did in 2020. And it was like, well, you already missed out on the boom. You know what I mean? And so, like, it's not as popular as you think it is, or as much of an opportunity as it is now. This is really important, especially now. I'm referring to a Wall Street Journal article, which is titled, Baby Boomer Women Are Now Deciding the Fate of Trillions of Dollars. This is a reference to this giant wealth transfer. Have they given it a name yet? The Great Wealth Transfer?
That's it.
Oh, okay. That's so lazy. We're talking about nearly $40 trillion of wealth. If you haven't read about this, Google it. There are tons of articles about it. But they're basically saying trillions of dollars are being transferred from one generation to the next. And there is a greater proportion of women who are now going to be in control of this money. And so it's never been more important for women to be more engaged. And this is such a great opportunity. And this is basically what this article is highlighting, that many of them are actively reevaluating how this money is invested and taking on a greater role in shaping the world, through their investments, which I think is really fantastic. But I think it's also, going back to what we were saying before, there's such an opportunity, I would say, for younger women to talk to, your boomer and your divorced rich aunties, because they have a point of view that is so valuable, and they can tell you in a way that I know that I can't, what you need to do in order to put on a financial lens of your glasses, because it is a way of seeing the world.
The financial lens of your glasses.
Well, what I'm saying is, like, the way you see the world, right? There was a way that women or people in general, but specifically women who are disengaged with their money, see the world and see their households and see what's likely. When you talk to those women who have maybe 15, 20 more years of experience and have gone through some things and now have assets, that are a result of a variety of occurrences and decisions, it's like, all right, now look at the world through this lens, if you will, and don't do some of the things that I did, you know? And I think that's the real opportunity here. So the article is talking about it already happening. And I would imagine the goal was to intrigue women who say, hey, even if you're not one of these women who are going to be receiving large sums of money, it is an opportunity for you, because the worst thing that could happen is that you just continue to defer. And that is where actual theft occurs. You know, if you continue to defer and convince yourself that you don't have what it takes to understand this, and that's what experts are for, you're right. There is certainly value in expertise, but it is a responsibility to manage this wealth. And I hate to sound like Dave Ramsey, you know, I'm not talking about this from a religious standpoint. I'm just saying I wouldn't gift a house to my son unless I knew he was equipped to know what it takes to be a homeowner. It's not just a matter of you can just get a mortgage and become a homeowner, but to manage that home and to manage that household requires a fundamentally different set of skills that a lot of women need to ensure that they are capable of developing and then applying to the wealth that they're receiving.
Yeah, I think there's several misconceptions about the wealth transfer. The first is that it's money, and it's not all money. It's $40 trillion worth of wealth.
Mhm.
So that's assets, that's businesses, that's homes, that's cars, that's art, that's anything that has value or is worth something. And I think the second myth is that we get to choose when we want to be in charge or when we take the lead. And we see this a lot when it comes to estate planning, because
Yes.
people don't feel like they have to rush the conversation with a loved one, which assumes that death is always something that you're going to get a heads up on. And that's just not the case.
Yeah.
In the article, they talk about how many women who are baby boomers are older have started to get more active in their finances because they know that their husbands statistically will die before them, and they need to get a hand on it before there's a family conflict. Y'all know enough about funeral movies to know that there's going to be some fighting. Like, if you don't know what assets or what the plans are, like, you're going to set yourself up for failure.
Yeah.
And this is part of the reason why women need their own groups. It's not about being separate. It's not about, men don't need to hear this. It's not about keeping secrets or devising plans that take his money. It's really about mainstream financial advice or mainstream investing advice being designed with the average investor in mind.
Yeah.
And for a long time, that average has historically been male. And so the traditional investment playbook assumes that all investors have the same financial trajectory, risk tolerance, long-term needs. But in reality, women face very different financial challenges that require very different strategies.
Yeah.
For example, women live 5 to 6 years longer than men, which again, why estate planning is so important. If you have a man that hustles and works hard for your family and then he passes, you don't have a plan unless you understand where the investments are. And because you live longer, your retirement savings have to last longer than what the traditional advice suggests for men.
Yep. Well, this is how I've always felt about the standard rule of thumb that we should save 10 to 15% of our income, right? Like, we've always spoken about this from a racial wealth gap perspective, but the same is true from a gender pay gap perspective. That's easy to say when you're being paid a dollar on the dollar, like a true dollar. When you're being paid 80 cents on the dollar, that 10 to 15% is significantly more difficult to actually pull off. And I'll take that a step further. If you know that you're planning on getting pregnant and or having multiple gaps in your career because you are having a child and you aren't able to work, the types of careers that you choose, which has an impact on your earning potential, is just as important as well. And so we take these things without any grains of salt, and we just say this is a standard rule of thumb, 10 to 15%. But I've always said it with respect to the racial wealth gap, you should not follow that advice.
Right.
You should be saving 25% should actually be your number. You know what I mean? And if you're a Black woman, well, unfortunately, significantly higher. You actually cannot afford to assume that even though you are on paper earning good money, that you will always earn that, because there are so many other factors related to the way that you earn money that you're likely not incorporating into those projections. You're going to have some gaps. You are going to miss out, unfortunately, on several promotions. The likelihood that you are not able to unlock certain corporate benefits or whatever it is at the same clip or the same rate as your male peers, like, it's unfortunate, but that is the reality that we're dealing with. And so, yeah, you can't, to your point, follow the same advice because it wasn't designed with those kinds of issues or nuance or erosion factors in mind.
And it was designed for someone who could start early. Again, because of inheritances and because of late career decisions, women are often making decisions about money later in life. So it's the first time that they're hearing about 401ks when their kids are gone and they're empty nesters, and now they can start investing at higher rates.
Yep.
We're also being asked to make decisions without a strong investment background. And so there is a chance that you may get swayed the wrong way if you're not able to explain what's important to you. Traditional investment advice is going to assume that maximizing returns is the goal. And so they might put you in an aggressive account somewhere where you can't touch the money until you're 65 or 70, or somewhere where you're penalized for pulling out a certain amount. And if what you actually need is to balance wealth building with flexibility and even sustainability, if you're a values aligned investor, you're not necessarily going to get that advice off the shelf.
Yeah.
And that's where communities come in. Communities were huge for me. When I was learning how to invest, there were women-only communities, women-led communities like Sense Positive with Tanya Hester. There was Statement with Stephanie and Emma.
Yeah.
There were all of these women that insisted that we have a space to have these conversations. And even at co-ed events, whether it was FinCon or Camp Fi, I was able to talk to women who could tell me the game early. They could prepare me for those early and expensive years of motherhood, like Papa Adams was talking about, because they would just tell you things that you hadn't thought about. And so I want to mention two opportunities because it's really important that whoever's listening to this episode understands that these spaces still exist. Not the ones that I went to, a lot of those have fallen off, but there are some new spaces that still exist and are dealing with 2025 problems. I went in 2012. Them problems are different now. The first one is Invest for Better. You've heard me talk about this on other podcasts. Invest for Better is a nonprofit organization that teaches women how to do values aligned investing. It's a very unique format in that it is cohort based. So it's a group of y'all going through the same program at the same time. And then it's also peer led. So it's self-led. You do some work on your own, and then you come together kind of like a book club to discuss it, ask questions, and learn from each other. And they just created a circle that is specifically for Black women called Shifting Wealth, Shaping Futures. And I'm so excited about this cohort of teachers. They finally released the people who are leading the classes, and I've met like 3 out of the 5 of them.
Yeah, I saw that.
My teacher is also teaching one. My old teacher, Vanessa, is also running one. She's a wealth of experience.
Why do you call her a teacher?
Because she was. I know, it's a circle lead. But she taught me so much because I hadn't thought about it. She's an older woman who retired at 51 from a government job and just had slowly converted all of her traditional 401k into values aligned investing. And so I learned a lot about her process.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of other people in other positions. There's Ro, who is teaching this year, who is a former attorney. I don't know if she still practices, but she was a former attorney, lives here in Atlanta, young kids, super fun. There's Tiffany, who's teaching, who just moved to Jamaica and is now like living her best life because she left a very stressful situation and is there with her kids. Like there's just so many good leads. And I know that the circles are going to be really beneficial. So if you're interested in learning more about impact investing or values aligned investing, which is basically making money while doing good, I will leave the link in the description. You can register for a circle now. It's no longer a wait list, so you can just register and join. Now, the second event that I want to talk about, if you're not interested in like a longer cohort experience, this is just a weekend, and it's actually hosted by our friend Kim Hunter Borst and 2 other women. If you've ever been to FinCon, you've probably met Kim or you know Kim. She gives excellent
Always
hugs.
bouncing around.
Yeah, she's just a ray.
She really is.
She is a ray of sunshine. She is hosting the Northeast Phi Camp Women's Weekend. Don't worry, men, the next one will be co-ed. But this first one is for women. It's April 25th through the 27th in Northeast Maryland, which is about 2 hours from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and DC. I had to look that up because I'm not familiar with Northeastern geography. But when she sent me the information about the women's weekend, it was already 80% sold out. So there were only 7 tickets left. So I don't know if it's still open, but I'm going to drop the link anyway and let y'all find out. But it is another example of just women coming together with a full agenda, being fully immersed with each other for a couple of days, and you can learn and bounce ideas. I mean, I remember the first one that we went to, the first camp that we went to, and we were shocked about how much we enjoyed it. And so anyone who's in the Northeast area that's looking for something to do in April, I'll drop the link, and hopefully there's still some spots left.
That's really, really cool. So I would imagine that event will sell out. Hopefully we can help get it sold out if it's not. And same for Invest for Better. I would imagine that those are circles because they don't allow, it's not like an unlimited amount of people. I think
no,
there's like
they
a
keep
max.
it small for a reason.
Yeah, which I think is really great. And so, if you got a chance to respond, like, don't think about it. Don't do what don't analysis paralysis, this thing, ladies, go ahead and sign up now. And they're both really, really great things. Cool. I think that's a great place to wrap.
All right. Well, thank y'all for listening to another episode of the Rich and Regular podcast. If you like what you heard, please let us know. We love hearing from y'all. You can leave a 5-star rating or review on any of your favorite podcast platforms, or you can drop a comment below to keep the conversation going. And let me just tell you now, we're not talking about submissiveness and all that. We're not getting into that in the comment. I bet somebody gonna do it. Somebody gonna shoot it.
Just trying to be true to the subtitle. Life at the intersection of money. Somebody triggered to be triggered.
I know. It's okay. We welcome the conversation. He did. He stood on business. But we welcome the conversation, and we will see y'all next week.
Come for me if you want to.
If you like videos like this and want to see more, make sure you click subscribe and turn on notifications.